As you've probably already heard, Sony, as in Sony Pictures and PlayStation, have purchased Bungie, the creators of Destiny, Halo, Oni, Marathon, Myth, a bunch of things. Well, mainly they have Destiny 2 at the moment, but anyways, purchased them for $4 billion. And before you go on saying that this is just because Microsoft purchased Activision, I just want to tell you that that's not how these things work and how fast these things work. Like, let me just explain what your situation would look like. Microsoft bad.
That's a thick ass boy! Damn! Bah!
And so, with that out of the way, let's talk about what this means. Some pros, some cons, and some of the reasons I believe led to this massive deal. I want to start out with why in the world either of these companies would agree to this deal. Well, for Bungie, it's pretty obvious. $3.6 billion is a lot of money. And for Sony, why in the world would they pay $3.6 billion for a free-to-play game? To put this into perspective, Microsoft bought Minecraft in 2014 for $2.5 billion, and ZeniMax in 2020 for $7.8 billion. The ZeniMax deal gave them Bethesda and ID Software. That's a lot of IPs right there. Now, accounting for inflation, the Minecraft deal is about the same as the Sony Bungie deal, but Minecraft at that time was already one of the biggest games in the whole world. Most people in the world knew about it. Destiny, not so much, and the ZeniMax deal for Microsoft was double the amount of the Bungie deal, but for a lot of IPs, you got Doom, you got Quake, Wolfenstein, then Fallout, Starfield, Elder Scrolls, all of those IPs and more all went to Microsoft with that deal. That's a lot. So why in the world would Sony pay that much money for Bungie, a indie publisher developer with one game currently out and is by far not the most popular game in the world or even in its genre of first-person shooters? But here's one key difference between why these purchases happen. Microsoft is purchasing IPs because they're the IPs. Sony bought Bungie, yes, for their IP and future IPs, but also for the technology that comes with Bungie. Now, automatically, what I think of is Bungie's excellence in the FPS genre. For decades, Bungie's been revered for how solid gunplay is in their games. Halo has probably the peak of FPS gameplay, or at least how gunplay is. And Destiny is, again, the guns are extremely solid and feel good to use. Better than a lot of other FPS games. So that's a massive point for Sony going forward. FPS games in the future, whether or not they come from Bungie directly, will definitely have Bungie's influence within them with how the guns work. And also, something that Sony really doesn't have much of is matchmaking and networking, crossplay, all that. Things that are in Destiny 2 that Sony will need going forward as they expand their game development sector. The hardware business of gaming is kind of dying, at least for consoles. Like Phil Spencer's been saying for a while, Microsoft and Xbox are going all in on games, not the console. Game Pass is obviously their best product. That's what they focus on. That's why they buy IPs. They don't want, or I guess they do want the technology from these companies, but that's not their main focus. Their main focus is getting popular games onto Game Pass to sell more Game Pass. That's pretty easy to see. Sony is probably building up their own equivalent to Game Pass. I think there's been rumors of that for a few years, but with Bungie's acquisition, that gives them an FPS game, an FPS studio, and then in the future, probably more multiplayer games to help them compete with Microsoft and Xbox. And this deal's been in the works for a year, but it didn't get serious until about half a year ago, is I think the timeline that's been talked about. So other than the technology Bungie brings with them, why else would Sony want them? Well, one, money, but two, their IP. Yeah, I just talked about how Microsoft focuses on IPs over anything, but for Sony, it's a little bit different. Now, of course, you have your Game Pass type thing that Sony will probably do in the future, and of course making money off selling the game, but also Sony is a pretty big company that includes Sony Pictures. You know, the studio that brought you Spider-Man, all the Spider-Man movies. Yeah, and James Bond, I guess. But anyways, Sony owns that stuff. They have Sony Pictures. And they're releasing Uncharted, the movie, soon. Like, really soon. And The Last of Us is getting a show. So I think it's pretty obvious that Sony Pictures has the intent to create Destiny-based movies and TV shows. Bungie's been working on it since they first talked to Sony. So, yeah, it's pretty obvious that that's a big part of it too. Working on the film sector of Sony. I mean, they've been talking about the possibility that Apple would be buying Sony Pictures for Apple TV. I don't think that's extremely likely now, or at least in the past few years, but Spider-Man and James Bond can only take Sony Pictures so far, so getting some new IPs in there, especially when they already own a lot of IPs, and just reaching in there and making movies based off games, especially after Witcher had massive success on Netflix, and I guess Sonic the Hedgehog being a financial success. Anyways, that's going to be a big part of this deal for Sony, is the movies and TV. So now that we've gone over some of the reasons why this happened, let's talk about some pros and cons of it. I'm going to start with some cons real quick, being that it doesn't look like there's too many, at least at the moment. So, I'm not completely sure if this is Bungie or Sony's doing, but I just feel like it's something I should mention here. Recently, Bungie's been taking down videos of Destiny music. Some of this music isn't accessible in-game. You have to access the game files to listen to these songs, yada yada yada. They're on YouTube with gameplay and stuff over them, but they've been taken down recently. This is something that's really weird since Bungie has not done this like ever before. So is it Sony wanting Bungie to clamp down on their IP? Or would this have happened whether or not the Sony deal actually went through? I'm not quite sure. This is just speculation, but it's just weird to think about the timing of these two events happening, like within a week of each other. So, anyways, that's that con. Next one, console exclusivity. So far, what they've been saying is there's going to be no exclusives. Not in Destiny 2. It's not getting pulled off of anything, and it will be continuing on consoles in the future and all that. So, looks all good there, but they've also said the same thing for future IPs from Bungie. But Xbox said that about Call of Duty, and then they reverted it to, yeah, the next 3 will be on PlayStation. And when they bought Bethesda, they said Starfield is going to be exclusive to Xbox. So who knows what's going to happen with that? It could be a Microsoft Minecraft situation where, yeah, Minecraft's on everything. But we just don't know enough at the moment, really. Hopefully, everything goes correctly and how they've said it's supposed to, and all Bungie games go to all platforms like they do now. Hopefully. I could see maybe remasters of old Bungie games like Oni, Marathon Myth, games like that, being PS5 exclusive. So there's that. Now that we've talked about the cons of console exclusivity, let's talk about the pros here for a second. First pro, they've announced that Bungie is going to stay multi-platform and pretty much independent of Sony. So the way it's sounding is it's going to be mostly an EA Respawn type of relationship where, yeah, EA owns Respawn, but Respawn does what Respawn wants for the most part. They just give their money to EA and EA gives them money to fund them. Hopefully that's kind of how the PlayStation Bungie situation works out forever. But other pros for this are that Bungie's going to have more money and hopefully some support studios that Sony is willing to lend them, meaning that the Forsaken sized expansions are a possibility again. I wouldn't expect this until after Lightfall or even Final Shape, really, but it could mean that we get more Bungie IPs soon, like Matter or the other IPs that they've said they're working on but haven't announced yet. So we could get those a little sooner, which is cool. Another pro being one of the reasons I stated this happened earlier. Movies and TV for Destiny and future Bungie IPs. But that if you like the lore and the story in Destiny, that's gonna be massive. And I don't think it's going to be that long until we see it, being that Bungie was already hiring for this. So, all in all, going over the pros and the cons and the reasoning why, I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm hoping for Forsaken size expansions to come back. I'm excited to see what else Bungie's working on sooner rather than later now. And I'm also scared of the possibility of exclusives to consoles. I play on PC. I have a pretty nice PC. I don't want to get a PS5. I have no need for it. If they release it on PC, maybe through a Sony PlayStation Now type thing, that's one thing. But if it's console exclusive, that would be bad. But maybe we get remasters of those old Bungie games or something. But anyways, cautiously optimistic on this. Tell me what you think. Did Sony pay too much? Is Bungie worth more? I'm not quite sure. I just want to hear your thoughts on this acquisition and the weird, crazy details on it. Anyways, see you next time. Hit that like button, subscribe. See ya.